Alrighty. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Before we get started, a couple of notes. Today is the 14th day of the Hebrew month of Kislev, which on the Chabad calendar marks the Rebbe's anniversary. The Rebbe, when he got married to the daughter of the previous Rebbe, Rebbe Tzin Chaim Mushka, this is their wedding anniversary, and the Rebbe connected this that it isn't just a happy occasion for the Rebbe, because if we think about it, the lineage of Chabad Rebbes, going back through the 7th generation, was always passed to family, son or son-in-law throughout the generations. And so the Rebbe connected this day, that this is really the day that connected him to the position of being Rebbe. Obviously, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and the Rebbe obviously was born as a special person, but the Rebbe very much felt like today is the day that connects us with him and him with us. So the connections that we all have and the Torah that we learn from the Rebbe all channeled through this day. So,
and further, he does have a relationship with the previous.
So going back, absolutely, but that's 5 generations ago. If not for this day, who knows if the leadership would have gone? I guess is another way of putting that to the Rebbe, and it's also a sign that, God willing, next week is the 19th day of Kislev. The 19th day of Kislev is the day of redemption of the previous Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. He was put in a Zara's prison for 53 days as part of a decree of there was a false accusation that he was supporting the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, it was him sending funds to the Jewish community in the land of Israel, which happened to be under Ottoman rule. But the Alter Rebbe was put in prison, and spiritually we understand that this was a decree from on high, sort of a judgment, whether or not the spread and the style of the Hasidus of the Alter Rebbe, whether or not it was the right thing. Not everyone agreed. Even within the Hasidic communities, there were those that were not so sure. The Alter Rebbe was very prolific. I mean, think about the Tanya that we're learning. This is taking some of the most Kabbalistical, most fundamental, most basic, but most profound ideas in Judaism and in Kabbalah, and distilling it that you and I can learn it. And not everyone was on board with that. And so the fact that the Alter Rebbe was in prison is understood as a referendum on that. And when the Alter Rebbe was freed, that was a sign that this is the right way to go forward. And therefore, this day is known as the Rosh Hashanah, the new year for Chassidus, for learning Chassidus, for what we're doing. And as part of that, the cycle of the Tanya. We're learning it one chapter a week. The Tanya, all 5 sections of it, is also divided into a daily section. Every day there's another paragraph, another couple of lines. And that restarts on the 19th of Kislev, which is this year Tuesday, I believe. And so for those that would like to add in their learning Tanya, especially that we've been doing it together, so you have the hang of it already, it's a great opportunity to get on board, to get started. There are books, there's online at Chabad.org, there's podcasts, any version of learning you can do, thanks to the fact that we're in 2025. And so I highly recommend, for those who would like to bring the Alter Rebbe, bring Chassidus into your daily life, not just into your Thursday, but into every day, this is a great way to get started. And with that, we will conclude chapter 8, where we last week we were rushed out of here, like the Jews leaving Egypt. And so we're going to learn the last idea on page 7, and we'll use this as a summary of what chapters 6, 7, and 8 spoke about. And that is, we were talking about the animal soul, right? We spent chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5 talking about the godly soul and what and its process and how it works and what it desires and how it connects to God through the Torah and mitzvos. And then we continue talking about the animal soul. And the fundamental idea about the animal soul is it wants things selfishly. Anything that it wants for its own gain, whether it's food, whether it's drink, no matter what it is, it wants it for itself. And the Alter Rebbe spent a while talking about.
That's survival, where we all.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Survive. It's again, and I want to reiterate, because this is a very important point. Chapter 8, if you look at the comments on Chabad.org, there's a lot of comments saying it's a very harsh chapter. It's a very demanding chapter. And it's right. Because this is telling us the ultimate way of living. This is a lifetime of work, as we'll continue to see over the next few chapters, to achieve life in this way. Because we're not talking about the animal soul wants negative things. It wants evil things. It wants sinful things. It wants things. It wants the same cup of water that the godly soul wants, the animal soul wants. But why does the animal soul want it? for its own selfish reasons, be it survival, be it the fact that it's thirsty, but it's to satisfy its own cravings, its own desires. And as the Alter Rebbe explained at length, the problem with that is that when we're talking about holy versus unholy, it's a zero-sum game. Either you're godly and therefore you're holy, or you're not and therefore you're unholy. Again, not sinful. You can live your entire life and not sin once and still run afoul of this whole situation. And that's because we're not talking about what's allowed and not allowed. We're talking about what's holy and unholy. Holy are things that are fully dedicated to God. Unholy, right? And in the category of holy, that could be including the most luxurious items, but if it's for the right reason, right? We spoke about things like the most delectable meats and wines, but if you're doing it because that helps you focus and helps you concentrate in service of God, then have at it. If you're eating the most luxurious and decadent things, but because it's Shabbat, have at it. That is holy because it embraces godliness. But if you're having that exact same meal on Sunday morning, suddenly why am I having this? Just because I want to fulfill my own desire? Then it's unholy. It may be allowed, but it's unholy. And the Alter Rebbe discusses at length, and he discussed the ramifications on our soul and what the process of cleansing these marks are. Because when we consume something for selfish, unholy reasons, it gets caught up in the klippos, in the traps and in the shells of unholiness. And then there's different levels of extraction, as we discussed at length in chapter 7, but how exactly you can do that. Then in chapter 8, the Alter Rebbe, throughout the whole thing, continued in this idea and discussed about what we do or what we consume that isn't holy, and therefore it leaves a mark on our soul and the various levels of cleansing that the soul will have to go through after 120 years.
But it's not a sin. Right?
It's not a sin. Absolutely not. It's not a sin. Eating a delicious steak breakfast this morning, assuming it's kosher and assuming you wouldn't have coffee with it, assuming all of those categories are met, there is nothing sinful about it. However, because it was selfish, because it was to satisfy my own desires, even if it's survival, no matter what it is, right? Again, as we explained briefly, even when we talk about the idea of satisfying your own survival, that really begs the question of, okay, but why am I surviving? Why do I need to live to see tomorrow? Am I living to see tomorrow because I'm a human and I desire to live, because every human does? Again, that's a human tendency. It's not a godly tendency. If I'm fully aware that at every moment that, yes, I have to drink now for my survival, I have to eat now for my survival, but why am I surviving? So I can continue to serve God? Well, then that's godly. The difference, the barometer, the test you have to make is this godly? Is this for God? Does this acknowledge God? Is this about God? If yes, then it's holy. If not, then it's unholy and it's at least temporarily trapped in the three klippos. The final idea with the Alter Rebbe expresses this, and I expect that this is going to be, I think, the hardest to wrap our head around, is in the idea of intellectual pursuits. Learning science, learning history, learning math, whatever it might be, falls under the same category. Is it Torah? No. Is it godly? No. And therefore, if we're just learning it to satisfy our own curiosity, then what are we doing? We're giving in to the animal soul. Again, it's not a sin. It's not bad. It's unholy.
If your attitude as a physician is, if you cure something, wasn't me, it was from Hashem, that's holy.
Absolutely. The Alter Rebbe is going to end off with that disclaimer. I mean, it goes back through history. So many of the rabbis were doctors, were professors, were scientists, but they had a good reason for it. We're starting off specifically if you're doing it to satisfy your own curiosity. Why, right? So 1 + 1 = 2 does not express godliness unless you know how to. Unless you're using that to understand how many cups of wine you need. So 2 + 2 = 4. So I need 4 cups of wine at the Seder. Then that math is holy. But if you're just doing math because you're curious, if you're just learning math or science or history because you're curious, is it sinful? No. Is it holy? Also not. So therefore, it's unholy. Now you might say, well, hey, at least I'm not wasting my time, right? At least I'm not sitting, shooting the breeze. At least I'm not. But the Alter Rebbe says, actually, once we're talking about unholy things, wasting time with nothingness is in a way better, as the Alter Rebbe is going to explain through this chapter. Because if you think about what are we involving in this whole unholy work, if I'm sitting and just having a schmooze with someone, which again, as we discussed at length, having a schmooze with someone could be holy as well. There's mitzvah to have friendships, a mitzvah to become close with people. There's a lot of reasons why it could be holy to have a random schmooze. But if we're just talking about wasting time with no holy undertones, in a way, that's better than learning something unholy, because learning something unholy is getting your intellect mixed up into it. As opposed to wasting time is a very surface level problem. As the Alter Rebbe continues, on the top of page 7, in these new copies, the page number is on the bottom right. On page number 7 of, don't believe I have any more, unfortunately, chapter 8. But okay. V'chein ha'esik b'chachmas. This is in the chapter 8 copy, not in the chapter 9. Chapter 8, page 7. V'chein ha'esik b'chachmas umas ha'elam. Bechlal dvarim betelim yechashiv le'inyan avim b'tol Torah, kamei shekasav v'halachos Talmud Torah. Occupying oneself with the intellectual disciplines of the nations of the world is likewise included in the category of engaging in consequential matters insofar as a sin of neglecting Torah is concerned. And in studying the intellectual disciplines of the nations too, one is guilty of neglecting Torah study as explained in the laws of Torah study. So the first thing Alter Rebbe starts with is you have to remember the first problem with not studying Torah is that you should be studying Torah. And if you should be studying Torah and you're not, that's called bittul Torah, and that's a sin. That's not even what we're talking about here, because a sin, wasting time of Torah study is a sin, as we established in chapter 1, and as we continue to talk about, if you should be learning Torah now, you should be learning Torah now. But in addition to the fact that usually if you're learning math, let's just use that as an example because I don't really like it. If you're studying math and you're learning math, first of all, you're wasting time of Torah study. In addition to that, however, the Alter Rebbe continues, moreover, the impurity of the intellectual disciplines of the nation is greater than the impurity of idle speech. This is an impurity. Here we're not talking about sin or nonsense, we're talking about impurity. The Alter Rebbe says this is a greater impurity than just wasting time with idle speech. For the latter, talking about idle speech, clothe and defile only the emotions which emanate from the holy element of Ruach within his divine soul. Here, when you are talking, when you're wasting time with the conversation, what are you entrapping in the klippos? What are you entrapping in it? You're only entrapping the idea of Ruach. What's the Ruach? We spoke about how these are 4 building blocks of creation, Kabbalistically speaking, and all our different habits and activities and things come from one of those 4. So wasting time, which is nothingness, comes from the building block, the yesod, the foundation of air. Air is also nothingness. It has no discernible, tangible aspect to it, and therefore wasting time comes from this idea of air. So that's what you're contaminating. Let's say you're contaminating from the element of air. Where are you contaminating it? You're contaminating in the klipas noga, right? Because again, it's not necessarily sinful; it's just unholy, and therefore it gets enclosed in klipas noga.
You're saying if you're doing something and it's not directly related to Torah, then it's wasting time?
Here we're talking about wasting time. We're talking about here he's going to contrast wasting time with what you might feel is spending your time wisely. You're learning math, but really you're also, relative to learning Torah, you are wasting time. Again, as we're going to finish off, unless there's a good reason to be learning it. That's the underlying factor here, is that if it's allowed, then there is a way to harness that. And learning math, if you're going to become a math, if you need math for your job so you can support your family, so you can live life, then that's holy. Then that's not unholy. That is holy as long as it's all aligned with your mission. But if it's not, here we're talking about a very basic, you're just doing it out of curiosity. So if you're wasting time, you're contaminating the element of air in Klippas Noga by tainting them in the impurity of Klippas Noga contained in idle speech, which is derived from the evil element, air, which is one of the components of this Klippa and his animal soul, as mentioned above. We skip those middle paragraphs, they're just some more context for review. Idle speech does not, however, defile the levels of Chabad, the intellectual faculties, right? What is Chabad, the organization? What does the name come from? It's an acronym for Chachma, Bina, and Das. Chabad has a huge focus on understanding. That started with the Alter Rebbe. That was really the defining thing about what he taught, what he changed. That was such a huge uproar up above that led to the whole story of the 19th day of Kislev, was that he said we all have to understand this. This is not just about doing because we feel or we connect or whatever it is, but understanding. So that's why the name Chabad is Chachma, Bina, Das, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. For a soul, for it is but foolishness and ignorance. Right? So wasting time is contaminates, but it only contaminates the ruach, the element of air. How do I know that it's nothingness? As he continues on page 8. Shagam hashetim v'amei aretz yechem medaber. Even fools and ignoramuses can speak this way. This does not require brain power. The most, usually specifically the most simple person can shoot the breeze with the best of them. However, when we're talking about specifically learning what he calls, foreign or other nations' intellect or wisdoms, not so in the case of the science of the nations. Thereby one clothes and defiles his divine soul's faculties of Chabad intellect within the impurity of the Klipas Noga contained in these sciences. Right now, here's the.
Could you, the Klipas Nova,
yes.
differs from the other Klipas?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Klipas Noga, which translates as the clear or transparent shell, is the easiest shell to break out of, right? Because when we look around the world, this table, does it express godliness? Right? This is a random table you got at Sam's Club. Anyone could have gone, it could have gone in any direction. This table does not express godliness. However, because it's allowed, it's something you're allowed to own, you're allowed to use, it has a transparent shell. Because it's covered, you don't see the godliness, but it's very easy to expose the godliness in it. How do you expose the godliness within this table? Use it for a Torah class. And suddenly, you've uncovered the godliness. Right? When we talk about the shell is the cover, is the obfuscation of the godliness within an item. A barrier, exactly. It stops, you don't see the godliness. Now the whole world is covered in a shell. But anything that's allowed, it's a transparent shell. Not a transparent that you can see through it, but transparent in the sense it's very easy to crack, right? Like it's pistachio shell. Some of them, they come half open, you just crack it open and you're done. Some of them you have to sit there with a hammer and nail. And that's the difference between the shalosh klipas atmeis, the three impure ones, those you can never break, right? A piece of pork is covered with those three klippos, which is the reason why there's three is a whole Kabbalistical thing we're not getting into. But those shalosh klippos atmeis, you can never do that. You can eat a piece of pork on Shabbos and immediately use that energy to go learn, and you have not extracted the godliness within them. How do you extract it? We explained at length in chapter 7. If it's possible, how can you do it? But for right now, most of the things we encounter in life, whether it's science, whether it's idle talk, whether it's eating, drinking, sleeping, smoking, whatever you can imagine, well, smoking is different, but anything, we've just used that an example in the past, so anything you can imagine is covered with a transparent shell. Looking at it, you don't see godliness. Looking at a cup of coffee or a bottle of water or glasses or a phone or anything you see, you don't see godliness. But it's very easy to access it in some cases. I mean, it's possible to access it. Use it for the right reason, and you've just exposed and you've extracted the godly spark within it. Is that clear? Now, where did this godly spark come from? That godly spark came from, this is again a sort of leaning pretty far into the Kabbalistical history of the world, but before the current world that we know, there was a different world, a world that had very, very strong lights of godliness. Godliness was a lot stronger, and the vessels to contain him were a lot weaker, right? In this world, the godliness that's contained within this table is well secured within this. You don't see the godliness. But in this previous world, there was too much godliness, too little containment, and it exploded. And therefore, those sparks drifted down into this world, which is our whole mission is to extract those sparks, which is a different conversation, which we'll leave for now. But the point is, everything in this world has a godly spark. It's up for us to extract it from the ones that we're able to, the ones that have a klipas noga shell. Now, as Len wanted to make sure we know, this is still klipas noga. This is not unextractable. How do you extract the godly spark within the wisdom of math, or with science, with biology, with medical school? Use it for the right reasons. What are the right reasons to learn all these topics? So as he explains on the bottom of page 8, Ella imkain oisa isim kardim lachtim bahem. Unless one employs them, these sciences, as a useful instrument, as a means of earning a more affluent livelihood with which to be able to serve God. It's a great career. Right? And therefore, it's okay to learn it if you're learning it and you're aware. Why are you learning this? So I can become a doctor, so I can support my family in comfort, so we can all serve God comfortably.
But it doesn't have to be the only reason, right?
No, not at all. As he's going to continue. Or you can learn astronomy. Why are you learning astronomy? Well, if you're learning astronomy because you're curious, that's self-serving, that's selfish. Not wrong, but selfish. But what if you're learning astronomy because you're trying to figure out how the Hebrew calendar works? As he continues,
of the new moon.
Exactly. Or unless he knows how to apply them to scientists in the service of God or his better understanding of the Torah, example given, he utilizes mathematics to better understand the laws of sanctification of the new moon. Something fascinating that we find when we learn Torah is, actually we'll finish chapter 8. V'zehu, this is on page 9. V'zehu taimai shel Rambam v'Ramban zochrein levracha v'siyun she'eskim behem. This is the reason Maimonides and Nachmanides of blessed memory and their peers engage in them, in the sciences, since they were able to utilize his knowledge in the service of God and his Torah. So just like everything else, intellectual pursuits, it depends what you're doing it for. If you're doing it for your own curiosity to satisfy your own desires, it's selfish, it's unholy. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, you're doing it so you can have a good career, you're doing it because you want to understand the Torah better, then it's okay. The mathematical concept of pi, right?
How do you know that as you become curious about, say, a topic that's of interest and relatively new to you, how do you know that unless you explore that curiosity, it is not in some way going to support something that is defined within you as the purposeful life?
So the real question, I believe, starts at why are you doing this? And again, we're talking here on a very high level, a very advanced level of service to God. Because between me and you, of course, I'm curious about things, and I go and research it because I'm curious and I'm a human and I don't want to live my, But truthfully speaking, that was selfish. That was for me. Now, is it possible that I'll learn math and I'll get so involved in math that I'll become the next, calculator of the Hebrew calendar? Maybe. But that goes back to our idea of that, eating food. If I eat something selfishly, can I then use that energy to serve God? And can I then go do teshuvah and extract that spark? Yes. But going into it, that's a pretty risky move. Because when I'm sitting down to eat and as we'll continue to see over the next few chapters, the real additional challenge of that, right? You might say, okay, so it's unholy. Who cares? It's not sinful, right? It's unholy. The problem is, this is a zero-sum game. There is only one winner. Every time we do something, what game? That's what chapter 9 is about, the showdown of the two souls. The problem is that any action that I do that empowers the animal soul, by definition, weakens the godly soul. So if I'm spending time exploring curiosities, even if I think, maybe this will be a path that I can go on to utilize it, while I'm doing it, I haven't done that yet. I haven't yet extracted the spark. It hasn't yet become holy. So at that moment, it's unholy and strengthening my animal soul. And that's why the phrase mitzvah goreres mitzvah. One mitzvah leads to another. Avera goreres avera. One sin leads to another. Why is it like that? It's because every mitzvah strengthens the godly soul, which makes the next mitzvah that much easier. And every avera, every sin, or in our context, every unholy action, strengthens the animal soul and makes the next one that much easier. And that's why sort of there's the idea of we don't start off wanting to sin. We start off wanting to do, what's the harm? It's allowed, it's okay. What's the harm? But we don't realize that we're strengthening the animal soul. And so today, the animal soul will tell us A, the next day will tell us B, the next day will tell us C, until he's strong enough that he could overcome the godly soul. But all of that really is about the conversation of this showdown. Because we just spent the last 7.5 chapters. In the middle of chapter 2 of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, describing the mechanisms and the processes and the desires of these two souls. A very, very high level summary. What does the godly soul want? It wants to connect to God. It is a part of God. It wants to relive and rekindle that connection. It wants to do anything that will connect it to God. What's going to connect it to God? Doing Torah and mitzvahs. What does the animal soul want? It wants to satisfy its craving. It's just like an animal that just wants things. It has cravings, it has desires. It wants, and it wants to fulfill its desires.
But when we do a mitzvah physically,
Yes.
isn't that the animal soul?
That's
The
a great
body-
question. That's going to be talking about it in text number 9. Because what Len is asking is that most of us feel like we are, who are we? We feel like we are our animal soul, right? So if we are our animal soul, then every time we do a mitzvah, it's still my animal soul doing it. That idea is not so simple. The way that the Alter Rebbe is going to phrase it in this chapter is that who we are is we are neutral territory. And we have the animal soul and the godly soul fighting over our actions. And so any action that I do is a choice. Am I doing this action on behalf of the animal soul, or am I doing this action on behalf of the godly soul? That's how he phrases it here. There's other places we get more detail that that our consciousness is our animal soul, but our true essence is our godly soul. It sort of gets a little bit into the weeds in that regard. But our actions, our deeds, what we do, the Alter Rebbe is going to explain in chapter 9, is neutral territory. And this is on page 1 of the chapter 9 booklet. On the bottom of the page, Hine Makim Mishkan Nefesh Abahamis Shemeklipas Nega B'Chol Ish Yisrael Hu Balev. The abode of the animal soul derives from Klipas Noga in every Jew, i.e. the place where the animal soul, Nefesh Abahamis, resides and is most manifest is in the heart. For as mentioned previously in chapters, the animal soul is predominantly emotional, and the heart is the seat of emotion. Now, the souls are obviously spiritual beings. They're not physical. They don't take up a spot. You can't do an X-ray or an MRI and find the animal soul in the heart. But the idea here is that it manifests, it expresses itself in the heart. What is the heart all about, spiritually speaking? I mean, physically, what's the heart about? What's the heart about? Pumping blood all around our body, right? I mean, on a very, very biological level. What does that represent on a more metaphorical, on a more spiritual level? That is the idea of pumping the passion around the body. And just like the blood flow, the blood circulation system, where does it start? It goes to the lungs, it goes to a lot, but where does the cycle reset? In the heart. Once it's reoxygenated, you have reoxygenated blood, it goes to the heart, and the heart pumps it through the whole body. That expresses the idea of that for the animal soul, it all starts with emotion. What do I want? As the Alter Rebbe continues on page 2, the staple, I have to add a margin to these. More specifically, the abode of the animal soul is in the left ventricle, as it is filled with blood, and is written, for the blood is the soul, indicating that the soul resides in the ventricle filled with blood, the left ventricle. Now, we'll ask our resident medical professional, is that true that only the left ventricle is filled with blood? No. So it's explained that what he means here is the fresh, reoxygenated blood that's going to then go out, right? The left ventricle is where the blood starts its journey. It's full of oxygen, and it starts at the heart and then goes out throughout the whole body. Right? Now there's the V'lochein, we'll continue, I'll say that thought in a few paragraphs. V'lochein, kol hatayva v'isparis v'kas v'deimehen heim belev. There, because the animal soul resides in the heart, therefore all lust and boasting and anger and similar passions are in the heart. All of these desires, all of these emotions, all of these passions, all start in the heart. They start in the heart, but then, what did Jimmy Carter say? I lusted in my heart. That's where it starts. The problem is, what happens next? Does it stay there? Or, the problem is that just like the blood, umehalev hemispashtes b'chol haguf, and from the heart, they spread throughout the entire body. V'gam oila l'mayach rising also to the brain to think and to meditate about them and to become cunning in them. For the animal soul, the story starts in the heart. I want something. And then the story spreads. I want something, so then my arm reaches out to get it from the shelf. I want to have a really sharp comment I want to say, so it reaches to my mouth so I can say it. And you know what else it reaches? It also reaches the brain. Because I want something, now I have to figure out how to get it. If it's not so simple, if I have to plan, if I have to scheme, if I have to figure out how I'm going to do it, it goes through my brain. So for the animal soul, the story starts in the heart, and from there, it spreads out the whole body, including the brain. All of our emotions, all of our passions, all of our desires, all of our cravings start in the heart. I want it, and then the rest of my body figures out how to make that happen. This is mirrored in the physical. Just as the blood has its source in the heart, and from the heart it circulates into every organ, rising also to the brain in the head. That is the animal soul. Now, for almost the entire chapter from now on, until the last line, the Alter Rebbe is going to talk about the process for the godly soul. We know the animal soul. It starts in the heart. I want something, I have an emotion for something, and then my brain and the rest of my body figure it out. For the godly soul, where does the godly soul reside? In the brain. The godly soul, the story starts in my understanding. We explained this at length in chapter, I believe, 3 and 4, when we talked about the process of how does the godly soul understand and want to connect and become excited about God? Through understanding. It connects to God on an intellectual level. We had the idea of chachma, that flash of inspiration from the soul, then the bina, the understanding, quantifying and really fully grasping godliness, das, making it personal, and that's what leads to the emotion. The difference between the animal soul, where the emotions, even if you look at a physical animal, we explained this before, an animal that walks around on all fours, the heart is either on the same level as the head, or sometimes even above the head. A human, what differentiates us is that we're standing on 2 feet. Our brain is always supposed to be on top of our heart. Why? Because our intellect is supposed to control our emotion. It's supposed to lead our emotion. As it continues on the bottom of page 2, but the abode of the divine soul is in the brains that are in the head, and from there it extends to all the limbs. Now, this doesn't mean that the godly soul doesn't have passion. It doesn't mean that the godly soul doesn't get excited and doesn't have emotions just like the animal soul. The difference is this starting in the heart, or is it ending in the heart? As it continues on page 3, v'gam b'leiv b'chol hayimani she'ein bo dam. And also in the heart, where's the home of the godly soul in the heart? In the right ventricle, which doesn't have any blood. And as we explained, it's not that it doesn't have any blood, it's that this is where the blood at the end of its cycle, the deoxygenated, after it's going through the whole body, for our use case, after it's done coming from the brain, that's where the blood comes back to. So yes, the heart is involved, but it's involved as an aftermath, as an effect, as an effect of the brain. As it's written, the heart of the wise, as in the Levi soul, is on the right. There's a verse in, I believe it's Mishlei, one of the verses that King Solomon wrote. He wrote that Leiv Chacham Liyamin, and the opposite of a fool is in the left. Why? Both of them have emotions. The question is this starting with emotion? For the fool, for the wicked person, for the animalistic person, it's his emotion, his heart, that's where it starts. For the Leiv Chacham, for a wise person, where's his emotion? Liyamin. On the right side, or when it's on the right side, that means that's an after effect of the intellect. Now this is a very important idea, because the process for the godly soul of what it wants to happen is it wants to be excited about stuff. But it wants to be excited about godliness. Now, how do you get excited about godliness? We are human. We as we discussed at length, we don't know godliness. Godliness is not our default awareness, our default consciousness. How do you get excited about something you don't see? And you know what? This is a question on the Torah itself. 2 of the mitzvos are emotional mitzvos. Love God and fear God. How can you command me to love something? You know, it's like when parents try to do that with their children. You know, love you. You know, that's your new friend. Become friends with them. So with toddlers that works, but once a kid starts to develop their own identity, you can't force a friendship. You know, even with siblings, you can't force them to love each other. How does the Torah command us to love something? And the answer is, we have to. The commandment is telling us we have to think about God. We have to understand. We have to contemplate godliness. And that process leads us to love God. Right? Even the verses, Shema Yisrael. What does Shema Yisrael mean? It means hear, but it doesn't mean just mean hear and listen. It means understand, comprehend. Comprehend godliness. And what's the next paragraph? Then, v'yahavta es Hashem Elokecha, you will love God your God. The process is we think about God. Now, what are we thinking about? The Alter Rebbe is going to talk about. But very generally, we think about what is God to me. When we make God not an abstract word that means nothing, when we explain, when we understand, everyone on their own level, what is God? Obviously, there's a limit.
Say what God is not.
We say what God is not, but not what is God. What does God do for me? Right. That's why in the prayers, what do we start off with? Verses of praise. We're praising God. Well, God needs to be buttered up. God needs to. The answer is no. We're trying to make us understand. When we read the verse of praise, we think about everything that God does for us. Just take a moment to think about that. How could you not love God after that? How could you not love God? If you think about how awesome God is, how could you not fear God after that? And fear, we don't only mean a very, juvenile, I fear because God is a great, mighty, powerful being that can smite me in 1 second. But fear is in awe. How could you not be in complete awe of God when you understand anything about Him? Even the most slight detail of God will knock our socks off. And that's why these commandments of loving God and fearing God are emotional commandments that make sense, because the commandment is really about the intellectual part of it. Think thoughts that will make you love God. Think thoughts that will make you fear God. As the Alter Rebbe continues to explain.
But action is also important. You have to act in a way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're just getting started here. We're describing the process. Just like in the animal soul, right? It starts in the heart, goes to the brain, but then goes to the rest of the body. It's all about where it starts. The process for the godly soul starts in the brain, goes to the heart, and from there spreads to the whole body. And then I serve God out of love, out of fear, as the Alter Rebbe is going to continue to explain. So in the middle of page 3, Vihi Ahavas Hashem, right? Of Kirishbe Shalheves. This revelation of the heart of the divine soul residing in the brain is man's fiery love towards God, right? So the godly soul does live in the heart. What form does it take? A fiery, passionate love towards God. Mislaheves belev hamaskilim, which flares up in the heart of discerning men who utilize their power of chachma. It's all about how do you develop a passionate love for God? Well, first you have to think about it. It doesn't come naturally to us. We have to start intellectually, and that will lead to the passion. Mevinim umezbeinim, utilize the power of chachma, continuing, who understand and reflect with the faculties of bina, understanding, by which they understand the matter in all its details and ramifications. It's a process. It's a really long, the process of going through the chachma, bina, and das, understanding a concept, really fully understanding it, and making it personal. It's a long process. What are you utilizing? Where does the story start? On page 4, B'daitam asher b'meichem, with the knowledge of their brain, i.e., with the faculty of dat, knowledge, which they immerse themselves and sensitize themselves in that which they understand. Thus, the love flares up in their heart of those who use all 3 faculties of chachma, bina, and das. On matters that arouse the love, i.e., in the contemplation of God's greatness, as the Alter Rebbe will soon conclude. Let's use a very basic example. I understand the chachma. The first step is I understand that God gives me everything. Bina, the next step would be I really think about that. I fully comprehend everything in my life, all of the blessings that I have, from the fact that I can talk and walk and breathe, and my health and my friends and my relationship and my community. All of that comes from God. I understand that. And then das is I make it real. It's not just an intellectually God gives me everything. It's I look at my hands. My hands are working. This is from God. Every action that I do, could you imagine if we lived that life? Every breath I take is a blessing, is a gift directly from God to us, right? And how do you know that it's that? Because how many people struggle to take a breath? How many people, God forbid, don't take a breath? We do. Every time we breathe in and out, that's a gift from God. Now, to fully internalize that takes a lot of chachma, bina, and das. A lot of meditation, a lot of focus, a lot of concentration. But when you do that, when you think about the fact that every breath is a gift from God, what that leads to is a love of God. How could you not love God, which is constantly giving you such gifts? Continuing. He says these kind of contemplation can add another emotion. Similarly, another deeper way in which the heart's emotion give expression to the presence of the divine soul in the brain, the gladness of heart at apprehending the beauty of God and the majesty of His glory. The joy that you see by imagining God's greatness. It's a joy. We're not talking about love. We're talking about just joy at the opportunity. I'm so happy that I get to have a relationship with God. That's another emotion that lives in the heart. Joy is not intellectual. Joy is emotional. But why am I feeling this joy? Because my brain understands God. And by using my brain, and here he uses a specific brain power, the power of imagination. As he continues, the gladness that is aroused on the divine soul's intellect, which the Alter Rebbe, borrowing a phrase from Ecclesiastes, describes as the wise man's eyes, which are in his head, meaning the brain harboring his wisdom and understanding, right? By using your mind's eye to imagine godliness, to think about godliness, to imagine the glory of God. It's not something you could see, you have to imagine it. How do you imagine something? You first have to understand it. Right? You can't imagine how something is unless you understand something about it. So you understand godliness to an extent, obviously, but you understand God's glory. You try to understand and comprehend. That leads that you can start imagining in your mind's eye how awesome and how beautiful and how gloryful God is, and that brings you joy. Continue at the bottom of page 4. When these eyes, i.e. the intellectual faculties, gaze intently at the glory of the King and the beauty of His unfathomable, infinite, and boundless greatness, then the heart rejoices and is glad, as explained elsewhere. And this leads to the emotion of joy. So again, this is a result of intellect. You understand whatever you could about godliness, and then you can imagine God's glory. Imagine, we don't see it, but imagine you look out the window and you realize that every tree and every branch and every mountain and every leaf is singing out God's praises. That's what we talk about in the verses of praise in the Psukkah de Zimra. We talk about how everything in the world is shouting out God's praises. You have to imagine it. You don't see it. But once you understand it, you can imagine it. And that sight should bring you joy. So we have already two emotions that we feel. Again, it's godly emotions in the heart, but it's a result of the brain. The godly soul's story starts in the brain and continues to the heart. And he says, more generally, on page 5, similarly, the other emotions of the heart too, such as fear of God and the like, originate from the Chabad, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge in the brain.
One word you never say is belief. Is belief going to come as part of this?
Absolutely, because belief is the fundamental kernel of everything, right? Because without belief, you can't understand. Because unless you believe in God, you can't start to think about God, right? Here we're talking about the difference is that belief is not necessarily something we can cultivate. Belief is an important part. Belief is something you can, once you have it, you can build on it. But belief is something we have from birth.
Leap of faith, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why whenever people want to start debating about God, is there a God, is there not a God, we can argue it up to a point. But the whole point of this world is that God is hidden, which means if you don't want to take that leap of faith, God has given you permission. God set up the world specifically that no matter how much I am convinced, even logically, of the existence of God, with all the proofs that we can talk about, it's still a leap of faith because there's always another way of explaining it. And that's why we're believing Jews, we're not understanding Jews, right? We use the phrase belief because it is a belief, it is faith. But that's not our topic specifically here because that is sort of before our conversation as opposed to part of it. Now, so we've established the two souls. What do the two souls want? What do the two souls want to experience? What are the processes of the two souls? The animal soul wants, starting in the heart, and therefore the rest of its body and brain go along with it. What does the godly soul want? It wants godliness. It wants to connect. It wants to understand. Again, starting in the brain, it understands God, and therefore it has passion, it has excitement, it has emotions, but it starts off in the brain. So, problem is, can these coexist? Can you have a two-state solution? Can you have a two-soul solution within the body?
You can, but you can't have a two-state solution.
Right. The Alter Rebbe will say you cannot have, for a similar reason as you can't have a two-state solution, you cannot have a two-soul solution. The body cannot be both at the same time a vessel for godliness and not godliness. Why? Because as I've been saying for the last 9 chapters, it's a zero-sum game. Where was the first time we heard this idea in the Torah? Of how there's two forces, and it's one or the other. When one rises, one falls. Esav and Yaakov. Right? When Rivka was pregnant with Esav and Yaakov, with her twins, there was a struggle. And so she was having a very, very painful pregnancy, so she goes to a prophet, and she says, what in the world is going on? And the prophet tells her, you have 2 nations within you. And they're constantly at odds. When one rises, one falls. When one falls, there is no both being up at the same time. And that's why it's so painful, because they're constantly jousting for that upper position. And that's what's happening with us as well. In our body, there can only be one. They cannot coexist. If our body is currently a vessel for the godly soul, the animal soul is out in the cold. If our body is currently a vessel for the animal soul, the godly soul is out in the cold. And that leads to the friction that we experience as our daily life. Whenever we're faced with temptations, with a struggle, right? That's always depicted as the 2 angels on our shoulder. One telling you to do this, one telling you to do that. That's what we're talking about. The neutral space, the neutral territory is our body, and there can only be one in charge at a time. As the Alter Rebbe continues in the middle of page 5. It is written, however, one nation shall prevail over the other nation. There's one or the other, as we spoke about Esav and Yaakov. Why is it like that? Why is it only one? Our body is like a small city. The small city is neutral territory. Who's trying to control it? There are 2 kings, 2 warring nations, constantly fighting over the city in the middle. I believe this is a quote from Ecclesiastes. Yes, in Ecclesiastes and Koheles, King Solomon goes on a long story about the small city and the different kings, and there's a wise man. All of the details that we're discussing now. Our body is like a small city. There's some islands I know that these days it's more of a ceremonial thing. But it's like there's a fight between Norway and Canada. Who owns this island? So every couple of months, one of them goes and replaces the Norwegian flag with the Canadian flag, and they have a good laugh about it, and they leave a case of a Canadian beer for the other people. That's sort of like the modern day version of this. But throughout history, it hasn't always been so civil. If there are 2 kings, if there's a certain region in, let's say, Ukraine, that's being fought over, there are 2 nations that are fighting over control of the small city. The reason why it's called a small city is because it's just us. All these great battles and these things are just happening over us, over our actions, over our days.
We have a constant war going on.
Absolutely.
Within us.
We have a constant war going on within us, over us. We are what they're fighting over.
But there's the idea that the 2 will get together at some point. Esau and Yaakov.
So, the idea of Esav and Yaakov getting together is an idea when Mashiach comes. Until then, it doesn't work. I will say that there is an idea of them coming together here as well, but only on one of their terms. The sense you can have them coexist, but the animal soul can be part of the story of the godly soul, as we're going to see. On page 6, Hainu, what are they fighting over? Hainu lahanig yeshvel kurtzenik sheyisarim le mishmate b'chol asher yigzer aleim. That is to say, each king wants to direct its inhabitants according to his will, so that they obey him and in all that he decree upon them. Right. So that was the parable. You have the city with the two kings fighting over it. Kach shtei hanefashes ha'olei kis v'hachiyunis habahamis shemahaklipa nilchames zu imzu al guf v'chol ivar. So too do the 2 souls, the divine soul and the vitalizing animal soul, which originate from the klippa and is therefore the very antithesis of the divine soul wage war against each other over the body and all its organs, the body being analogous to the city and the organs to its inhabitants. Right? Now, just like the two kings, each soul wants everyone to listen to it. The divine soul's will and desire is that she alone rule over the person and direct him. So that all of the organs be subject to her discipline, following and obeying her dictates, and furthermore that they surrender themselves completely to her, i.e. that you not only obey her but also surrender the will to her. And she further desires that still that all the organs become a chariot to her. She wants the entire body to be completely, totally in line with what she wants. Now there's different levels that we're talking about here. The godly soul, right, wants the body to listen. Now there's two ways. In the olden days, there was two ways how you could travel somewhere. There's the horse, right? The horse has a mind of its own, but it's under your control. You're controlling it, you harnessed it, it's going in your direction. But then there's the wagon. The wagon has no mind of its own. Right? When you're driving a car, well, these days already we've come full circle. The car does have a mind of its own, and the car can drive itself. But for a good couple of decades, this is a really good analogy because the car cannot. If your car had a mind of its own, it was a really big problem. These days, it's a selling point. If your car has a mind, right? When you're driving a car, it's not that the car is, the car is listening to you. The car is you. You're controlling it fully. It has no desires, nothing of its own, and that's the extent that the godly soul wants to control the body. It wants the entire body and all of the organs and all of the mechanisms of the body to be 100% completely in line and following what the godly soul wants without any, second guessing or any other temptations.
I don't understand when it says the souls originate from the klippa. I thought we said the klippa is a barrier. So I don't understand that sentence.
So when we talk about stuff originating from the klippa, it's not that they originate from the klippa itself. It's they originate from the godly spark, which is covered by the klippa. Right? So we use that and that phrasing to say that where does this come from? It comes from a covered place. It comes from a place of concealment. Now the concealment itself is nothing, it's just concealment. But within that concealment there's a godly spark. And that's what we're talking about. That's the soul of these ideas. Continuing at page number 7, what exactly does this look like? This total control by the godly soul over the animal soul. V'yu levush la'eser b'chines v'gimel levushim haniskarim la'el shitabish kulam be'ivarei haguf. Moreover, the divine soul desires that the organs be also a garment, an instrument of expression for her 10 faculties and 3 garments of thought, speech, and action mentioned above, all of which should clothe the limbs of the body. The entire body should be permeated with them alone, with all, every thought, every speech, and every action, and every emotion should only be godly versions of it. No alien should then, someone to pass through the organs, God forbid, i.e. the animal soul, to exert no influence over the body whatsoever. This sentence, lo yaver zer b'seicham, is a blessing about the land of Israel, that no foreigner will cross through. And the Rabbi spoke at length how even talking about a foreigner that's just passing through, or a foreigner who's there for peaceful reasons, no one has any influence, no one should have any control over the land of Israel. That's what we're talking about here as well. There is no identity, there's no actions, nothing at all except for the godly soul. Dahainu, tlas meichin shebereishu mimluim min chachma bin nadash benefesh alikis. That is to say specifically, the 3 brains, the 3 sections of the brains, right, which correspond to the 3 intellectual faculties, chachma bin nadas, should be permeated with the Chabad of the divine soul, shehi chachmas Hashem uvinasei. Namely, in discerning God and understanding Him, i.e. applying the faculties of chachma and bina to understanding godliness. You should have no other thoughts at all, no other comprehension. That is what the godly soul wants. Every thought should be holy. Luzbainin, right? Every piece of knowledge, every piece of understanding. By pondering, we're on page 8, by pondering His unfathomable and infinite greatness with these 2 faculties, through applying, I'm going to move a little quicker through the section because it's sort of reiterating what we discussed at length about exactly what the godly soul wants. We're also coming closer to 10:30 and don't want to keep anyone too far over time. Right? So now, what is the godly soul? What is the process the godly soul wants? As just at length. It wants every thought to be godly. Every piece of understanding to be godly. Every piece of comprehension to be godly. And
It's going to lead to a lot of guilt.
what?
It's going to lead to a lot of guilt. It's almost
Absolutely.
impossible.
Yeah,
to do.
absolutely. And as we started off, this is not an easy thing to accomplish. We're going to talk in the next few chapters about this is our life. Our entire life is to fight for this status. Every action and every moment is this battle. And you know what? All of us, to spoil it a little bit, we all have the role of Beinani. We all are this battling person. A tzaddik is someone who doesn't have these struggles. A Rasha is someone who fails these struggles. Our job is to be a Beinani. Our job is to have these battles and emerge triumphant every single time. But that's a goal we work towards. That's not something that that's not easy. Through applying this meditation, the faculty of Das, knowledge as well, i.e. through immersing oneself in the subject of God's greatness with the depth typical of Das, so that one not only understands His greatness, but actually feels it, they, i.e. the aforementioned faculties of Chachma and Bina, engage in pondering God's greatness will give birth to an awe of God in his mind and a dread of God in his heart. Right? So he wants the intellect, she wants, as we've been calling it, the godly soul wants fully godly intellect, which will lead to fully godly emotions, both fear and awe. This will also be born of the contemplation, a love of God burning in his heart like a flame with fire, like fiery flashes. His soul will thirst and pine with desire and longing to cleave to the blessed Ein Sof with his heart, soul, and might. It is written, and you shall love God your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Your entire being is full of God. There is no foreigner, there's no other part, there's no part of your life which is not consumed by this love. Now again, where does this love come from? The left ventricle. Because the right ventricle, which is the result of the brain's influence. This is page 9. This love will rise from the depth of the heart, that is, from the right ventricle, the seat of the divine soul's emotional faculties, as mentioned above. This kind of love that the soul desires entails that the heart be inlaid with love from within, and furthermore, not only would love, as it were, be on the surface of the heart, but the heart would also be full, with the love occupying its entire space, as it were, and furthermore, that it would indeed be filled to overflowing, i.e. the love would overflow to the left part of the heart and affect the emotional faculties of the animal soul, which is either, as the Alter continues. And here we're making the point even further. The godly soul that wants to be in control doesn't only want to be in control of the right ventricle, it also wants the left ventricle, which so far has been, that's the fort of the animal soul. The godly soul wants to be there too. What do you mean? That's where the animal soul is? Here's where the important point is to remember. The animal soul is not bad. It's not wrong. It's selfish. It's klipas noga. It is a transparent shell. Just like anything else, it could be harnessed for the right reasons. The animal soul, what does it want? It wants to do things that it wants to do. So if you can train your animal soul to do, if you can train your animal soul to want godliness, then what have you just done? You've harnessed the animal soul as well. Because now the animal soul also is in line with you. And that's the ultimate goal of the godly soul, is not only to be in control of the body, but to be in control of also the animal soul. And that's very, very, to actually want and desire and crave godliness, the same way you and I crave 7-layer cake, to quote Rabbi Gordon. That's quite the task we have ahead of us. As he continues, this love, the love with us inundate the left part of the heart as well to crush the Sitra Achra, specifically the element of evil within it, in the animal soul. What are we crushing? We're crushing the evil within the animal soul. The animal soul itself is a great purpose. Means the lust emanating from klipas nega. Right? The idea of lust is not bad. The idea of wanting something is not inherently bad. You just have to you have to want the right things. From birth, the animal soul wants animalistic things. With the right influence and the right training, the animal soul can be trained and brought to love God and to want God. And also to despise, just like right now our animal soul despises certain things which we despise, right? Certain people, certain things. The animal soul can be trained to despise things that aren't godly. The effective animal soul will be changed to transform from a lust of mundane pleasures to a love of God. I jumped the gun about that part. We'll get back to that soon about the disdain. It is 10:30. I just want to make sure everyone's okay staying a couple of minutes so we can finish the chapter. Anyone in a rush? Okay. Continuing on page 10. Right? We just quoted from the Shema. You should love your God. The Talmud explains, it's written, you should love God with all your heart. Our sages interpret, base themselves on the use of the dual form of levavcha instead of libach. Libcha means your heart. Levavcha means your heart, plural, which allows the verse to imply with all of your hearts, plural, with both of your natures, with your good inclination and also your evil inclination. Your evil inclination, I don't like the fact that they use the word evil here, because that's sort of like the way we experience it. But the animal soul is a selfish inclination. The selfish inclination can also be trained to selfishly love God. V'hainu, what does that mean? This transformation of the animal soul's lust to a love of God entails rising to attain the level of ahava rabbah, abundant love. A love surpassing even the level of the powerful love like Fashion that we mentioned earlier. It's one thing for the godly soul to love God, even very, very powerfully. It's a whole other level for the animal soul to also love God. That's called ahava rabbah. That's called great love. That's a whole other level of accomplishment. This level of love is what Scripture describes as ava b'tainugim, a love with experiences delight. As the experience of delight and godliness that is foretaste of the world to come, since man will in the world to come consists of delight and godliness. Loving God, or delighting in godliness, right, could be one of two ways. It could be a very spiritual desire, spiritual love. But it could also be the same love that right now I love food and drink and sleep and all of those wonderful things. That's called ahava b'tainugim. That's called loving of things, loving of experiences in this world. I can have the same experience for godliness. How? By really, really beating my animal soul into submission and retraining it and reprogramming it that instead of loving food, it loves God. It might still want food because of God reasons, but it's not selfish anymore. In the sense that it has godly desires, and that is what, we discussed a few times about what exactly is the soul going to experience in the world to come. The answer is this. We're going to bask in godliness and enjoy godliness the same way we currently enjoy basking in the sun and enjoying the sun. And that's what the soul is going to experience. So we can have a taste of that in this world by learning to love God on that level. Continuing at the bottom of page 10. This delight is felt in the brain, containing chachma, wisdom, and intelligence, which delights in perceiving and knowing God, commensurate with the capacity of one's intelligence and wisdom. The greater one's grasp of God, the greater delight. How can you start working on that? Well, if you ever learned something that you really enjoyed? Right? Sometimes you learn something, and it's not just intellectual. You enjoyed it like a real, almost indulgent enjoyment. That's what we're talking about here as well. We're talking about enjoying God, enjoying God's pleasure the same way we can enjoy that, right? That's sort of the idea. This delight is the level of water and seed, i.e., we're on page 11. This delight is the level of water and seed, i.e., light that is sown in the holiness of the divine soul, which transform to good the element of water in the animal soul, from which the lust for physical pleasure has previously arisen. That same place, the same, right, we explained how because water is the source of everything that grows and everything that's alive, and all of our pleasures can be sourced back to water, so that comes from the root source of water. By transforming the water, we can change that desire, instead of being pleasure-seeking for physical pleasures, we're pleasure seeking for spiritual pleasures. Now, there's a lot of, before you continue the last paragraph, there's a lot of spirituality and a lot of mystical ideas sprinkled throughout this chapter. And specifically because of the nature of the class, we didn't go into a lot of them, right? The sources and all these sort of the exact processes. The main idea that we've expressed so far in this chapter is the fact that there are these two forces that we've explained at length in the last 9 chapters, they are fighting for control. And they want opposite things. The godly soul wants everything to be dictated by intellect, meaning by godly intellect. I understand God, and therefore I have emotions for God, and therefore I do for God. I want everything to be, the godly soul wants everything to be part of that system. Every thought you have should be a godly thought. Every emotion you have should be a godly emotion. Every action you have should be a godly action. Every speech you have should be a godly speech, and every thought should be a godly thought. The animal soul, what does it want? It wants the exact opposite. It wants that every thought I have should be selfish. Okay, not evil. It's not evil. Just to finish the story of the godly soul wants everything, including the animal soul, to be godly. What does the animal soul want from nature, from birth? It wants the exact opposite. It wants every thought to be a selfish thought. It wants every emotion to be a selfish emotion. It's actually opposite. It has selfish emotions and it wants us to lust and to think about all those emotions which would lead to every thought being a selfish thought, every speech being a selfish speech, and every action being a selfish action. Now, the Alter Rebbe is going to finish with a very powerful question. Why? Why did God possibly create an animal soul? Why? Where is this coming from? Why did God create an animal soul that wants the exact opposite of the godly soul? And the answer is given in the form of a parable.
Say that again.
The answer is given in the form of a parable, of a story of a mashal, as it's called in Hebrew. And this mashal is brought in the Zohar, in the Kabbalistical foundation of Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah gives a story of a king. Like all good parables start. There's a king who had a prince. And the prince was soon going to be taking over the country. And the king was worried, does this prince have the fortitude? Does the prince have the ability to withstand temptations, to withstand the challenge of the world? And so the king set the prince up with a challenge. The king hired an immoral woman to go and tempt the prince. Now, this immoral woman, when she's tempting the prince with her temptations, why is she doing it? She's doing it because she was hired by the king, and even more, it's explained. She's a resident of this country. Of course, she wants the next king to be successful. She doesn't want the next king to be some floozy, to be some person who can't withstand the temptations. But in order to be sure of that, she has to do her job very, very well. Therefore, she does her job, and anyone looking at her would imagine that she is trying to derail the prince's whole career, trying to tempt and trying to trip up the prince. And she is. But why is she doing that? She's doing it for the right reason. She's doing it for the kingdom at large, in order to make sure the prince is good. Now, the truth is that in the parable, the story continues sort of that she goes too far. Our animal soul sometimes pulls it too far and sometimes pushes us more than is necessary. It takes a little bit too much enjoyment in its job of tempting us, and that's why when Mashiach comes, the evil inclination is going to be destroyed, not just transformed. It's going to be destroyed and punished because it goes too far. But the kernel idea of why does it exist? Why did God create us with an evil inclination? Why did God create us with an animal soul whose nature is to be selfish? In order that we, our godly soul, can prove that we can withstand it. As the Alter Rebbe continues.
The reason for choice.
Yeah, exactly. You can sum it up in the reason of choice. In order to be sure that we can withstand. Okay, I just jumped ahead. I realized I was on the wrong page. So all that I just said, put a pin in it. We'll come back to it in a second. On the bottom of page 11, Gomer Right, so we're really finishing up the thought about the fact that the godly soul wants to transform the animal soul. It is similarly written in Eitz Chaim, on the authority of the Zohar, that the evil of the animal soul is transformed and becomes perfect good like the good inclination itself when it is stripped of its unclean garments, meaning the mundane pleasure with its clothes. It is a desire. The animal soul is desire. You take off its soiled garments, its dirty garments, its selfish desires, and put on clean garments, godly desires, and it's completely transformed. Continuing on page 12. V'chein shar kol hamidish belev shehein anfei hayira va'ava hiyu l'Hashem avadi. The divine soul further desires that similarly all the other emotions of the heart, which are offshoots of the fear and love, be dictated solely to God. So that's we talk about emotion. We talk about intellect. We spoke about emotion. We spoke about emotions. V'chol koyach hadibur shebapeh v'machshava shebamayach yemuluim min levushay machshava v'adibur shanefesh l'kis levada. Also, the entire faculty of speech that is in its mind, and the thought that it's in its, and the thought that it's in the mouth, and the thought that it's in its mind, be filled exclusively with the divine soul's garment of thought and speech. Shehein machshavas Hashem v'seirasei liyes sichasei kol hayom leipasik puma migirsa. V'koyach ma'asav shebiyadav, namely the thoughts of God and His Torah, in which He would speak all day, His mouth never ceasing from study. V'koyach ma'asav shebiyadav v'shari machivarav yiyum ma'asim hamitzvos levad shehu levush hashlishi shenafesh lekis. And the faculty of action vested in the hands and the rest of the 248 organs, this faculty, being the third of the garment of the divine soul, be engaged with the fulfillment of the mitzvahs, i.e. he utilized his ability to act solely with the the mitzvahs. So again, the godly soul wants everything. Every thought, every speech, every action, every emotion, every intellect to be godly. And I will say one final thought about the transformation of the animal soul, is that it's brought down in other places, that the animal soul, once it's harnessed correctly, is a much more powerful force. Because our power to chase the things that we want is always going to be more powerful than things that we intellectually train ourselves to want. So the desire of the animal soul is more powerful than the desire of the godly soul. Just like the animal soul is an animal, right? An animal can be a very negative force. If you have a bull loose in a china shop, it's massive destruction. At least that's how the saying goes. But if you harness that, if you take that bull and you put a yoke on it, you put a plow on it, you could accomplish so much more than you could have accomplished by yourself. Yes, you have to harness it, you have to access it, you have to utilize it, but the potential, once you harness it, is to accomplish so much more, which we'll discuss in another place, about the gain that you have once you transform the animal soul. But for now, the animal soul is not transformed. So what does the animal soul want? As we finish, now here's that whole thing that I was talking about with the parable of the king on the bottom of page 12. Ach, nefesh b'hamish m'klipa, ritzena lehevich mamish. But the animal soul derives from klipa desires the very opposite. It desires that the body be pervaded with its faculties through its thought, speech, and action. It wants everything to be selfish and self-indulgent. Why? Here comes what we just spoke about. L'tevas ha'adam she's gaber aleh v'yinatzcha k'mashal hazena shebezer kadosh. But the animal soul desires this for man's benefit, in order that he prevail over her and vanquish her, as in the parable of the harlot related in the Holy Zohar, which is the parable that we just discussed, explained in more details on page 13, of that whole story with the king that needed to challenge, to test his son to make sure he's up to it. So yes, while the test is happening, the animal soul seems to be our adversary, seems to be our godly soul's adversary, and fighting it. But the truth is that deep down, it has the right intentions, and that's why God created it. So in summary, in this very long, in-depth chapter, what do we establish? We establish the battle. What are they fighting over? The animal soul and the godly soul are fighting over complete control over our thought, speech, and action, and intellect and emotions. And in the next few chapters, we'll talk about how that battle plays out, and who the winners and losers and fighters are. God willing, next week.
What you're talking about reminds me of, in the section of the Torah where God says, let us make man in our image. So who is the our? So the rabbis say, well, he's talking to the angels. Dennis Prager, because he already made the animals, he's saying our is the animals and the angels.
So if you add God plus animal, you get a human. I've never heard that before.
That was Dennis Prager. came up
No,
with that.
knowing Dennis Prager, I don't know if his thoughts on Torah are from himself. He probably learned that somewhere. I mean that in a positive way. That he probably
Yeah,
it's probably
in
from a
fact,
legitimate source.
He did say where he learned it
Yeah.
from, but he said when he heard that, it rang true.
Yes, absolutely. We are. I mean, this is the premise of Tanya, is really that this is our life. Chapter 9 is really sort of that moment of this is our life. This is the battle of our life. Every decision, every moment, every fight is this life. And our journey, as we continue to explain over the next few chapters, is to win more battles than we lose. And this zero-sum game is really like in moment to moment. And as we spoke about how in one moment, the godly soul could be winning. And then in a flash, I could just, I'm middle learning Torah, and I suddenly turn to my friend and say a negative comment, and my entire being, my thought which thought that comment, my speech which said it, my body which turned to say it, everything was just transformed to being a vessel for the animal soul. And that's what makes it so challenging. And much later in Tanya, in the chapters like sort of the 20s, where the Alter Rebbe gets into sort of some of the challenges, the Alter Rebbe starts to troubleshoot. And one of the things he talks about is that this can be so disheartening. You're struggling with these battles, you're struggling with the same temptation, and it's 40 years later and you still have that same temptation. And it's really disheartening. And the Alter Rebbe tells us, yeah, that's the way life is. Because if you think about it, not that this is sort of something I'm still struggling with, but you think of this is my life. I discovered my life mission is clearly to fight this temptation. Because this temptation I never grew out of. I'm fighting the same demons that I fought when I was 12, I'm fighting when I'm 52. It must be because this is my thing. This is my challenge. And that's empowering and that's invigorating. It's not that I'm stuck in the mud. It's that this is my place. This is my part in serving God. We'll discuss that at length when we get to those chapters.
Thank you.